The story begins with Inna walking home from school around 8 p.m. It's pouring rain, and the entire atmosphere is heavy with tension and mystery, like something terrible is about to happen. We soon learn that she lives with her uncle after losing both her parents in a tragic accident. As she arrives home, she keeps calling for her uncle because the house is unusually quiet. Suddenly, she feels like she stepped on something. When she looks down, she finds a puzzle piece with an incomprehensible design. Moments later, she notices her uncle lying in the middle of the living room floor, dead. Someone had stabbed him in the neck from behind with a screwdriver. Inna freezes in shock, unable to move. When the police arrive, they recognize her immediately. Her uncle used to be the head of their department before he resigned. Jean, the detective assigned to the case, begins investigating the house, hoping to find any clues. In Inna's room, he discovers a screwdriver similar to the murder weapon, instantly making her the prime suspect. During questioning, she seems completely disconnected from reality. She begs the detective to interrogate her another time, saying her mind is completely blank and she can't remember anything from the moment she stepped into that cursed house. Despite Jean's efforts to help her recall events, she can't piece together any clear memories. Jean becomes more convinced that she's faking her amnesia to avoid taking responsibility. Even though there's no solid evidence against her, he insists on continuing the interrogation, believing he can break her down. He bluntly tells her that her uncle died at the exact moment she arrived at the house. Too much of a coincidence. He also mentions the disputes they allegedly had over inheritance since he was in charge of everything after her parents died. At that point, she stops him, accusing him of inventing a scenario in his head. She insists there were no problems between her and her uncle, no fights, no inheritance issues, nothing. She truly doesn't remember anything and pleads with him to widen his investigation and consider other suspects if he wants to find the truth. Back home, she lies on the same spot where she found her uncle's body, hoping it might trigger her memory. She begins to hallucinate, seeing herself murdering her uncle. There's a 50% chance she actually did it and just blocked it out. Trying to remember more, she recalls the puzzle piece she found on the floor that day and rushes to Jean. She tells him that if he wants to find the real killer, he should start with that puzzle piece. It's the only clue the murderer left behind. 10 years pass. Inna has transformed. She cut her hair, toughened up, and lives for the thrill, jumping off heights just to feel alive. After each adrenaline rush, she heads to therapy, still trying to recall exactly what happened that night, but nothing seems to work. During one session, her therapist asks how she's doing. Inna answers with deep emotion. She still can't sleep more than 5 minutes at a time because the nightmare keeps replaying. As for her social life, it's a mess. When she's around strangers, she feels mentally blank and struggles to make conversation. Meanwhile, Jean is still stuck on the case. He even visits a Korean bakery owned by a woman who turns out to be related to Inna, her Italian husband, and her return to Korea just after the incident, staying a few days before leaving again. Jean speaks with her, hoping she might remember something new after all these years, but she tells him she only visited her uncle because she missed him, nothing more. Back at his office, Jean finds Inna waiting for him. All these years she's been quietly following him, hoping he'll believe her and help her find the real killer. But when she sees the same cold look on his face, she walks away, determined to move on. We then learn she's not some adrenaline junkie. She's grown into a respected criminal analyst. She heads to a new crime scene, a 10-year-old boy found dead at his computer, stabbed from behind. Her sharp focus helps her notice the smallest details. She quickly deduces the killer must have known the layout of the room well. She also notices the younger brother is academically excellent. His room is full of awards, while the older brother seems insecure, having written his name on all his belongings, perhaps to affirm his identity. The older brother was the one who called the police. When recounting the events, he focused more on his parents' reaction to the scene than on the actual incident, showing no real emotional connection. Based on all this, Inna concludes he's the killer. She explains her theory to her team and returns to her office. Later, her department head confirms their suspicion that the older brother is the culprit, but they can't get a clear confession. He claims he remembers nothing. This sparks something in Inna. Perhaps by interrogating him herself, she might finally unlock her own blocked memories. She uses psychological pressure to get the boy to open up, and he finally confesses everything, even details from before the murder. At the same time, Jean is at dinner with his colleague Wang and another officer, Amjad. He tells them he's trying to get close to Inna, hoping she'll eventually trust him and reveal something, anything, to prove whether or not she's guilty. He still can't shake the belief that she might have killed her uncle. He retraces the route from her school to her house, trying to figure out the timeline. Each time, he confirms she arrived exactly when her uncle was killed. He stakes out her house so often that the housemaid calls the police, thinking he's a stalker. Meanwhile, Myung-jo, another character, rushes out of her bar, speeding off in her red car. Officer Rawan, sitting in her patrol car, notices the traffic violation and wants to pursue her, but changes her mind. She's waiting for a colleague. Back to Inna, she returns home only to be greeted by a delivery man with a yellow envelope. Inside are new puzzle pieces with a different illustration. She rushes to her room, grabs the old piece from the night of the murder, and puts them together. They're part of the same puzzle. Panicked, she tries calling Jean repeatedly to share the discovery, but he doesn't pick up. He's at his mother's house where he spends every week's day off. Inna heads there anyway, but his mother tells her he didn't come today. She goes down to the garage to find her car, but realizes she forgot where she parked it. While searching, she spots a red car parked off to the side, its lights mysteriously flickering. Out of curiosity, Inna takes the body to go and see what's going on. She picks one that turned out to be dead because someone had tied a rope around her neck, and her son identifies her. Turns out it's Myung, the same woman who broke the traffic light earlier, meaning she was in a hurry. The moment Jin finds out that Inna was present at the crime scene, he becomes more convinced that she's the one who did it to her uncle. I mean, all these coincidences can't just keep happening, right? As soon as his department head sees the deceased, his face goes pale as if he's just seen a ghost. But he pretends everything is fine so that it doesn't interfere with the investigation. As for Inna, she keeps looking for any bit of information to figure out who this new puzzle piece might be. Unfortunately, when she asks the delivery company, they tell her that the order was dropped off at an abandoned men's restroom, and they have no other details. So she heads to Jin's office to tell him everything in the hope that he'll finally believe she has nothing to do with the incident. But as usual, he gives her the same reaction, that she's the one creating the whole puzzle just to frame someone else and deflect suspicion. She snaps and says, "Look, I gave you the two pieces I have. I've told you everything I know. Whether you believe me or not, that's your choice." Jin then goes to review the security camera footage, but sadly, it turns out Myung was left in a blind spot, and the cameras didn't catch anything. His suspicions begin to swirl again, so he visits the psychiatrist to check if Inna might actually have forgotten what happened at the time of the incident. But he gets nowhere. She tells him frankly that these are her patient's secrets, and she can't reveal anything to anyone, no matter who they are. Jin returns to the office, but as soon as he gets there, he runs into Inna, who had come to ask why he visited her doctor. She talks to him honestly and says, "I didn't do this to Myung. You can even ask my mom. I was asking her about you, actually. And besides, the time of her death matches exactly when I received the puzzle piece, so whoever killed my uncle must be the same person who did this to Myung." But Jin isn't buying a word of it. He tells her to snap out of this mystery drama mindset she's living in, gets in his car, and leaves. He heads over to Myung's bar to question the girl who worked there. She tells him there were no cameras inside because it was considered a private place, often visited by important people. She gives him her manager's number, saying she'd probably know more. Jin checks the call records from the night of the murder and finds that one number called Myung over 3 times. When he dials it, he's shocked to find it belongs to Police Chief Gyun. He takes his supervisor and confronts the chief, asking how he even knows a woman like Myung. At that moment, the chief confesses that he was a customer at her bar. He called her that night because he had booked a private room and later changed his mind, so he wanted to cancel. But she never picked up. Jin doesn't really believe this, though, and asks him to put the statement in writing so everything's documented. Then he calls back the bar worker to ask about the nature of the relationship between Chief Gyun and Myung. She gives the same story but adds something new. There was also another police officer who used to hang out with them. Suddenly, Director Wang comes forward and admits he was the one who used to go drinking with them. He explains he kept that information to himself to avoid getting dragged into unnecessary trouble. That sparks a whole new round of internal investigations. They begin re-interviewing all the officers at the precinct to find out who had ties with Myung. Unfortunately, word leaks to the media, and the whole thing becomes a scandal for the police department. Most of the officers start resenting Jin for opening up this whole can of worms. Then the bar girl contacts him again. She has the name of another officer who used to party there. Jin is stunned to learn it's Amjad, one of his closest friends. He visits him and questions him casually at first. Amjad says, "Yeah, I was just out having a drink like anyone else. At the end of the night, I walked her to her car to get some fresh air after all the stuff I drank, but anything that happened after that, bro, I've got nothing to do with it." At this point, Jin is completely overwhelmed. He starts doubting everyone around him as new revelations keep surfacing. Meanwhile, Detective Boan can't shake the image of Myung on the day of the murder. She feels guilty, thinking if she had followed her when she sped off and broke the signal, maybe she could have saved her. Boan keeps following the case from a distance, so no one pulls her into the mess. Meanwhile, Ina gives a lecture to a batch of new police recruits, and afterward, she starts connecting the dots between her uncle's murder and Myung's. She becomes convinced it's the same person, especially with the whole puzzle piece link. Plus, she concludes that the killer had emotional control in both cases, because he stayed in the car with Myung all the way to her house without doing anything, until she parked in the garage. After this overwhelming flood of thoughts, Ina heads home. But the moment she walks in, everything from the day of the murder comes rushing back. We're taken into a flashback where she first entered the house and saw her uncle lying dead on the floor. At that moment, she saw the killer's reflection in the mirror, but out of sheer fear, she pretended not to notice anything. One wrong move and she might have been next. Out of trauma and guilt, she forced herself to forget every detail. The next day, Ina grabs her bag and heads to the police station. She's now part of the team investigating Myung's case. When Jin sees her, he's in total disbelief. How could she, a suspect, now be one of the investigators? He pulls her aside to confront her, and she tells him she remembers everything now, that the killer was with her in the apartment at the time. She urges him to actually think things through and help her catch the real criminal, instead of just standing there. But Jin gets even angrier at her tone and walks away, telling her to show some respect when talking to someone older. She starts calling him uncle and pretending like they're one small happy family, then just walks off like nothing happened. After that, she goes to see her therapist, the only person in this whole world who actually believes her. The woman, the therapist, is pretty straightforward and tells her, "What you did wasn't wrong. Sometimes running away is half the courage you need. And either way, whatever memory your brain gives you, that's what you'll believe." Meanwhile, Jin reviews the garage surveillance footage for the 5th time in about a month, just in case he missed something. This time, his effort finally pays off. When he zooms in on her face and boosts the brightness, he notices a rope tied around her neck from the moment she entered the garage, meaning the killer was already with her in the car since she left work. Jin heads straight to the crime scene to replay the whole situation, and by chance, he finds Ina already there, holding a fruit platter. Very confidently, she tells him, "Finally. Now you're sure I wasn't the one who did all this?" Then she explains all the conclusions she's come to. The killer didn't kill her on the drive over because he was waiting to get specific information from her. Once he got what he wanted, he finished her off. As for the fruit platter in her hands, she says she brought it for the woman who lives there because last time she had to rush off and didn't get to properly meet her. Then, Ina takes Jin to his mother's place. The moment they start eating, Mom begins to skillfully probe Ina with questions to learn everything about her, and to figure out if she can trust this girl or not. And wow, Jin's mom doesn't hold back a single bean. She tells Ina everything in full detail until finally, Jin ends the lovely lunch, grabs Ina, and walks her out. At that point, she tells him honestly, "Look, I was doing all this to analyze your personality. Instead of getting all toxic and putting me on blast like I'm the crazy one, trust me, I did this because I felt you're actually a good guy with a good heart, someone I could rely on. Now it's your turn to analyze me, to decide if I can be your friend and someone you can count on too." The next day, when Jin arrives at his office, he finds that Ina has sent him her own personal case file, so he can study her properly without exhausting himself trying to guess who she is. Around the same time, she prepares a full report and holds a meeting with the entire team to share her thoughts and theories. She explains all her suspicions, but no one takes her seriously. They treat her like she's just acting out some mystery movie and stirring up pointless drama. Later, Jin gets in his car to visit Myung's father, Mr. Byung. They had tried calling him multiple times to inform him about his daughter's death, but sadly, he wasn't answering. Suddenly, Ina jumps in the passenger seat, without warning, without asking, like it's her own car. She tells him, "You're going to need me. With the nature of my work, I've started noticing small but really important details. Either way, you've got nothing to lose by keeping me around." When they arrive, Ina immediately figures out the house has been abandoned for a while, just from the large pile of letters thrown in front of the door. They ask the neighbors and learn that the father was moved to a care facility because of his age and memory loss. So they change direction and head to the center, hoping they might get a clue. There, the nurse explains that his condition is very bad and he hasn't spoken a word since he arrived. But Ina remembers Myung ran away from her father when she was just 17. So she decides the best way to handle this is to dress like a student and pretend to be his daughter, so he'll talk. The moment she says, "Daddy, I'm here," he responds emotionally. He takes her hand and talks to her as if she's really his daughter. He asks her about the man she used to date. He never liked him since the day he saw his face. That's when Jin steps aside to talk to the neighbor who moved Mr. Byung to the facility. The neighbor says that Myung ran away when she was young and came back about 7 years later with a man, someone her dad didn't like, and said she had completely changed after being with him. After finishing with the neighbor, Jin heads to Myung's old house, only to find that Ina is already there. She tells him she came to look for anything related to the boyfriend Myung had. She's sure there must be a photo of them somewhere, and sure enough, they find one in an old stash of her belongings tossed in a drawer. Of course, the first thing Jin does is send the photo to the bar worker who used to work with Myung. She immediately recognizes the man and tells him his name is Lin. When Myung first opened her bar, Lin had visited and bought the most expensive bottle just to celebrate with her, but after that he disappeared for a while and only resurfaced last month completely changed. He argued with Myung and asked her for money. During the argument, he even threw in her face that the apartment she lives in was originally his. At that very moment, Jin's boss calls him and tells him they found Lin's fingerprints in her car at the time of the incident. They rush to his restaurant to arrest him, but he's already gone, so they begin tracking him down by checking CCTV footage. Eventually, they find that he parked his car in a completely unmarked location and vanished. Jin personally heads there to investigate. He finds a very tall wall and manages to climb it, but injures both his hands badly in the process. Then they search Lin's car and find the same type of rope used in Myung's murder. Around this time, one of the assistants tells them that Lin used his credit card to book a hotel room near where he abandoned the car, so the team heads to the hotel, and when Jin enters the room Lin stayed in, he immediately smells something off. An unusual stench coming from the bathroom. He notices red stains on the floor under the tub and realizes instantly another crime has happened here. They take fingerprints and confirm their suspicion. They review the hotel's surveillance and learn that Lin had left, dragging a red suitcase behind him. He threw it into the sea. So now, the investigation shifts to the water, because whatever's inside that suitcase may finally solve the whole mystery. At that time, Ina had just arrived at the hotel. She entered the room to analyze exactly what had happened, and she immediately felt something was off. Her profile of Lin was that he was a hot-tempered man who couldn't control his emotions, so the idea that he'd commit a murder so calmly, without breaking anything in the room, was almost impossible to her. That meant someone else must have carried out the murder. She quickly headed to Jin to share her suspicions, only to find that the police had just discovered the red suitcase. Inside it was half a human body, missing the limbs and the head. She told Jin the body belonged to Lin. As for who did this to him, she still didn't know. And of course, just like always, he didn't believe her. That is, until the autopsy results came out, confirming that her analysis was spot on. At this point, Ina couldn't stop thinking about her uncle, how he ended up getting tangled up in all this mess. She asked the housemaid if there was ever a time when her uncle's personality had changed completely. The maid confirmed that he had changed after the death of Ina's parents, and that a few months later he had basically become unemployed. The next day, when she went to the office, she couldn't stand being around Jin. Every time her analyses turned out to be correct, yet he kept dismissing her. She followed him and demanded to see the interrogation footage of Lin's wife, Zayn. When he refused, she provoked him, saying, "What, are you afraid I'll expose you? We're both working the same case. We shouldn't be hiding info from each other." As soon as she watched the footage, she felt there was something odd about Zayn. When asked if she knew Myung, she replied too quickly, without even thinking. She claimed it was her first time hearing the name, even though it was a common one in Korea. Ina drove over to visit Zayn for a casual chat and personality read. She told her upfront that she came out of curiosity and asked how long she had known Myung. Ina was pretty sure she had heard of her before. Zayn admitted it bluntly. Yes, she knew her husband was cheating on her with Myung, but now it was all over. May God rest her soul, she added. Despite everything, Zayn said she considered Myung a friend because she felt unusually comfortable talking to her. She went on to say that she and Lin had lived in separate rooms because she couldn't tolerate any noise. She was very sensitive. She explained that she seemed so emotionally composed because she had experienced loss before. Her grandmother and sister died in a fire when she was 13. What affected her even more deeply was the fact that as a child, she never had her own room, even though her sister did. That left a scar. With all that in mind, Ina returned to the office to discuss it with her team. She had concluded that Zayn was the one who killed her husband, and she likely did it in the same way she had once killed her sister and grandmother. They never treated her like a real person. They even gave the sister a room, but not her. And of course, she couldn't have done all this alone. She must have had an accomplice, a weak, easily manipulated person who would go along with her horrors. Ina knew how Zayn lured her husband to the hotel. She sent him a message saying she was cheating. That's what brought him all the way there, only for her to stun him with a taser as soon as he caught her. Meanwhile, Jin began suspecting Zayn too. She had told them during the investigation that her husband never came home on the night of the incident, but security footage clearly showed that he did. When Jin returned home that evening, he found Ina already in his living room, casually walking around. "I called you so many times and you didn't answer," she said, "so now suffer the consequences of your actions." She then gave him all the info she had gathered and let him know she ordered coffee for a long night ahead. The next day, Jin brought Zayn back in for further questioning. She said maybe her husband did come home that night, but she had been asleep and didn't notice. Then, in a very casual, nonchalant way, she admitted she had been seeing someone else, a guy named Mason, whom she broke up with a month ago. "Maybe he killed my husband out of jealousy," she shrugged. When Jin went to interrogate Mason, he found him nervous and fumbling with his words. That, plus the injuries on his arms, was enough for Jin to realize he was the guy who jumped from the high wall. He dug into Mason's background, tennis coach, school friend of Zayn's, and they'd reconnected a few months ago when she began training with him again. At that point, Ina realized that Mason was the weaker party here. If they pushed him a little, he'd spill everything. And he did. As soon as Jin reminded him of what could happen if he didn't cooperate, Mason broke down, overwhelmed by guilt and disbelief at what he had done. He relived the entire scene, confessed to everything, and told them where to find the rest of Lin's dismembered body. Finally, the case was solved. The next day, Ina brought gifts for everyone in the office. She was officially back on the team. She ended with her final words. "The one who killed Myung is a completely different person, someone no one knows yet." Then she left, leaving the rest of them to stew in the mystery. Jin followed her. He'd learned his lesson by now and wasn't going to let her slip away again. He playfully asked, "So, who exactly were you referring to?" But she just smirked and said, "Oh, now you want to pry into my secrets? You've had your chance." Seeing no hope of getting an answer, she got into her car and drove away. At the end of the day, Ina returned home and found another puzzle piece waiting for her, a new package. This time, it contained a body diagram with all the same missing parts that were found from Lin's corpse. That's when Ina froze. How could someone know those exact details? The police hadn't released that information. What was going on? Was this still about Zayn killing her husband over family drama? Or were the cases beginning to overlap in a much deeper way? She rushed to her cabinet and pulled out all the puzzle pieces she had. She stood there, staring, trying to rethink everything from scratch. Had she missed something? The next day, she returned to the office to review the case with her supervisor. They concluded that someone else, an unseen hand, was orchestrating everything from a distance without ever touching the crime scenes. Later, Ina visited Zayn in prison and showed her the puzzle. Zayn claimed it was her first time ever seeing it, but her reaction made it clear something wasn't right. When she tries to remember what happened, Ina realizes she had a strong feeling that someone was around them at the exact moment she threw the bag into the sea. It's like there was an invisible observer, silently following every move and pulling their strings like puppets, without anyone ever catching them in the act. Now we move on to the next case. A man in his 50s was hanging out late at night with 3 of his friends. The next morning, they wake up to find him dead. Someone had slipped a diuretic substance into one of the bottles, and unfortunately, he was the only one who drank from it. Naturally, Jin starts suspecting the three friends, as they're the only ones seen on camera entering and staying with him. But the challenge is figuring out which one of them actually did it. One of them had passed out drunk during the entire night, another left early because his wife was yelling at him to come home, and the third, well, he's the most suspicious one because he was the one who went out to buy the drinks from the supermarket. Still, there's no solid evidence pointing to any of them. They all seem genuinely affected by the loss of their friend, who died at the prime of his life. But when they start to feel the pressure of being blamed, they begin accusing each other. At that point, Jin returns to the crime scene hoping to find any overlooked evidence, and of course, guess who he finds there? Ina. She casually tells him, "You know why people kill each other? It's usually debts, fights, or mental issues. But none of those explanations fit this case. Something's missing, some unknown fourth factor." She invites him over to her house to reanalyze everything from the beginning. She now treats her place like their unofficial investigation hub. Together, they start digging into the personal backgrounds of each suspect, trying to figure out what would push any of them to do this. Unfortunately, they hit a dead end. That's when she suggests broadening the scope. Maybe there's a fourth person involved. Jin remembers the janitor. He was seen on camera entering the area where they were hanging out. So they bring him in for questioning, but he seems like a kind-hearted man, clearly not involved. He tells them that the victim had lost his son a year ago and that the friends had something to do with it. That revelation opens up a whole new motive, so Jin and Ina head over to the victim's house to investigate. They find it unnaturally clean and overly organized, which makes them suspect that the victim himself had put the substance in the drink, possibly to kill himself and his friends at the same time. The next day, Jin brings the three friends in to find out exactly what happened with the son. They go into a flashback. The son had started working at their factory to help pay for college. He was a bright, kind young man. One day, one of them asked him to finish a task on his own, even though he was new and didn't know how to handle the machinery. He got badly injured, and instead of calling for help, they panicked and left him there, afraid of getting blamed. He later died from the injuries. Despite everything, Ina still can't fully understand why the man would drink the poisoned drink alone. She visits her therapist to try to make sense of it all. The therapist tells her he probably did it that way so his friends would live the rest of their lives consumed by guilt, each one convinced they were the reason he died. Later that evening, when Jin drives her home, Ina is already waiting with a full dinner prepared. She pulls out a chilled bottle and jokingly asks him, "If you were in the victim's shoes, would you have killed yourself or those around you?" Without hesitation, he drinks from the cup. He clearly trusts her now, as if she were a lifelong partner. She pulls out a new puzzle piece to explain her perspective. She believes that not all the victims in these cases were actual victims. In fact, some were the real monsters behind the horrors. And there's someone else out there trying to piece it all together, sending her the puzzles so she can analyze the details with him. When Jin wakes up the next morning, he's shocked. He has no idea when she left because he drank so much he passed out. Suddenly, she walks back in and teases him. "Told you not to go past 3 cups, didn't I?" From that point on, he decides to convert his home into their secret headquarters for investigating the case, because now they even suspect cops at the station might be compromised. They can't risk discussing anything there. She reassures him that she's ordered him a special blend of coffee, because of course, she's not about to let him do this for free. As they sit down to review the details, they find a name, Don Su, on the victim's call history from the day of the incident. While Jin is preparing to call for information, Ina is already on her way to Don Su's company for a face-to-face meeting. She confronts him directly, asking how he knew the victim, because no one calls someone 3 times in one day without knowing them. When she senses he's being evasive, she starts messing with his emotions, playing on his fears. She warns him that the killer is taking out people one by one, and who knows, maybe he's next. She even paints a grim scenario. What if someone hides a needle in your ceiling fan, touching just the right nerve, killing you instantly? Donsu is so shaken he asks her to leave, and the security team escorts her out. Meanwhile, Jin pays the victim's wife a visit, asking about her husband's mental condition. But she says the only thing she knows for sure is that therapy costs so much it drives anyone mad. Jin gets visibly irritated and storms out with her following behind. At the end of the day, when Jin returns home, he finds a row of boxes lined up outside his house. It's immediately obvious they belong to a woman. Clearly, the house is no longer just his, it's their house now. In the middle of a casual chat, Ina suddenly says, "I'll be sleeping here for a while." Jin doesn't object. She finally manages to sleep for 2 whole hours without waking up in a panic. Ever since the incident, she's only been sleeping 5 minutes at a time, haunted by nightmares of Kobise. Farid finds it hard to leave her in such a state and tries to comfort her, but she insists, "Let me be. Just come and go as you please." That's when they both go quiet. In that moment of calm, Jin receives a call from the police. Donsu has been found dead. His assistant had discovered him slumped over his desk. At first, he thought he was just napping, but when he tried to wake him up and got no response, he realized the worst. The assistant adds that lately, Donsu had seemed depressed. His name had been dragged through the mud in the press, and maybe it was just stress or overwhelming guilt. What really raises suspicions, though, is that Ina had been injected in the back of her neck, meaning someone must have been in the room with her during the incident. Jin's doubts start to multiply. He questions everyone around him, but no one will give him answers. Even the assistant acts clueless. Meanwhile, Ina is at the hospital with Jin, waiting for the autopsy report. Suddenly, a courier shows up with the report, delivered straight to her, which really shocks her. That's when she becomes sure the killer is close. Very close. Donsu was clearly the 4th killer in this strange chain of events she's been tracking, and now it's obvious the killer is always one step ahead. On the way home, Ina suddenly jumps out of the car with a box between her teeth and rushes to her neighbor's house. She's trying to combine the 4 puzzle pieces she's collected, hoping they'll reveal something new. While sorting through them, she notices something in the background of one puzzle. It's a Ferris wheel. She zones in, lost in thought, when Jin storms in, furious that she left the car without a word. He warns her, "The killer is watching you." That's not safe. She smirks and replies, "What's this? Are you finally admitting you love me?" But she brushes it off, saying, "Don't flatter yourself. You worry about everyone." She gets serious again and explains what she noticed, something about the theme park in the puzzle. Then Jin gets a call and steps aside, trying to get information out of the caller. They ask him about the nature of his relationship with Ina. If there is something between them, he should just admit it. But Jin insists Ina has been through enough and doesn't want to complicate her life. He asks for time, let the case wrap up, then he'll tell her everything. Meanwhile, Ina starts researching theme parks that match the one in the puzzle. Eventually, she finds it, a rundown amusement park that's been abandoned for years. When she gets there, the caretaker tells her the park has been closed for 33 years and is scheduled for demolition next month. She asks if any major incidents ever happened there. He reassures her, saying the only drama was kids getting lost during peak crowds. Nothing more. Later that night, when Jin returns home, he finds the entire place decked out with balloons and decorations from that same amusement park. He stands there, stunned, unsure what to make of it. As always, Ina doesn't explain anything. She just walks off mid-sentence. Jin follows her like a puppy, realizing she's clearly off to uncover something new. On the road, he notices she's driving recklessly fast, so much so that he starts fearing she'll crash. Then he spots a strange car tailing them closely. When they stop at a red light, he gets out to confront the driver. Ina follows, casually saying, "Relax, I was just trying to simulate the feeling of being stalked, wanted to know what it feels like." Jin is not amused. Later, he grabs his assistant and goes to talk to Donsu's secretary. He shares everything he's noticed. Jin's certain that the killer is hiding among their own ranks. Even the tiniest mistake could give them away. That's when the assistant mentions something odd. When he first arrived at the crime scene, he saw a napkin on the floor near the desk, but it was missing by the time the police filed the report, which means someone from the police removed the evidence. That's a huge red flag. Jin warns his assistant not to mention this to anyone, not a soul. He starts quietly observing his colleagues, his eyes now full of suspicion. One of them must be the killer. He decides to go see the division chief and voices his suspicions. The chief offers help. That night, Jin heads home and finds Ina has sent him an address. She wants him to meet her there. When he arrives, he realizes it's the home of the late Myung. Ina tells him she's found something big. The apartment they're standing in has been owned by all 3 suspects. First Donsu, then Jin's former friend Din, and finally Myung. It's clear now, this apartment links all the killers together. So the big question now is, what's really going on? And will the truth finally come out? Then we see Ina, who was still isolating herself in her apartment, trying to gather any clues that could lead somewhere, but sadly, all her efforts seemed to go nowhere. There was no clear connection between the three victims, except that they had all lived in the same apartment building. Ina then went to Jin's place, where they sat down and spread the puzzle pieces in front of them, but they were still confused. Why was her uncle even connected to all of this? Out of frustration, Jin decided to take a break and went out to buy them both coffee. When he returned, he found Ina fast asleep on his couch, apparently already getting used to crashing at his place. When she woke up and saw him, she joked, "You could have at least covered me with something instead of letting me freeze like this. Now I understand why you're still single." The next day, Jin decided to visit Amjad, someone who used to be close to Ina's uncle. He hoped to learn more about the man. Amjad welcomed him and started recounting everything, how her uncle became a police officer and quickly built a strong reputation for solving cases. He was one of the brightest officers, but everything changed when a string of serial murders started. The case involved a killer who was targeting one victim every Monday. At first, the murders seemed random, but when it happened 3 times in a row, they realized it was the same person. Eventually, 5 girls were killed in total. Ina's uncle took full responsibility and ended up resigning to calm public outrage, since they couldn't catch the killer. Meanwhile, Ina was in a therapy session with her psychologist, who asked her who she'd been emotionally close to lately. But Ina brushed off the question and said she had something more important to discuss. She wanted to investigate her uncle's past and understand his decisions and life better. She admitted she'd been postponing this for fear of being devastated by the truth. The doctor responded gently, saying, "We all have things we're afraid to face, so we pretend not to notice them." But the doctor then set a boundary. "Unfortunately, I can't tell you more. My personal life is private. I am your therapist after all." As Ina left the session, she ran into Detective Rawan, who was just stepping out of Dr. Sang's office. Rawan was clearly nervous to see Ina and explained that this was the only clinic covered by insurance for officers in the area. She decided to be honest and told Ina that she had seen Myung on the day of the original incident, breaking a red light. She hadn't followed her out of loyalty, but Ina snapped, telling her, "Think! Why would someone in that situation break a red light when a police car was in sight? Because she wanted you to follow her." Realizing this, Rawan felt guilty and admitted that even if she had followed Myung, she wouldn't have been able to help. The killer had already overpowered her. Later, Ina met up with Jin again to go through the old case files of the serial murders. They hoped to find any overlooked detail related to their current investigation. Jin warned her, "Be prepared for anything. Your uncle may have been hiding much more than you think." He reminded her to view things as a professional profiler, not a grieving relative. While digging into the old records, they found something interesting. The brother of one of the victims had once filed a defamation lawsuit against a journalist during the time of the murders, so they went to speak with him. On the way, Jin brought up a strange incident, a handkerchief that had disappeared from one of the crime scenes. Ina was surprised and asked why he hadn't mentioned it earlier. She was also suspicious that he had discussed it with Wanja, one of the suspects. Jin assured her, "No way. Trust me, I'd stake my life on him having nothing to do with it." Ina gave him a skeptical look and repeated his own words back to him, "View this as a case, not as your friend." When they met the victim's brother, he was still clearly affected by what had happened. He explained that he sued the journalist Danny for falsely reporting that his sister worked in a nightclub when in fact she was just a student. She had only gone to the club that night to drop off a friend. That lie had destroyed her reputation. He was shocked to learn that Ina's uncle had died around the same time, just after meeting with that same journalist. The official story was that the journalist had taken his own life due to depression. Jin and Ina then pulled the case files and reviewed the photos from the journalist's death. In one picture, he was lying on the bed with a black bag around his neck, and next to him was a puzzle piece. That's when they realized Ina's uncle was not the first victim. Ina was stunned. She couldn't believe she hadn't considered this earlier. Her uncle's murder had been executed perfectly, no evidence left behind. That level of precision meant it couldn't have been the killer's first time, and she was right. It wasn't. The only reason the killer's first crime hadn't drawn attention was because he hadn't left enough evidence to suggest it was even a murder. At the time, the police concluded that the journalist had taken his own life simply because he had been suffering from depression. Everyone around him knew he was struggling. Even the puzzle piece found next to his body was dismissed as a toy belonging to his young son. The next day, Jin went to request leave from his supervisor, wanting to focus entirely on the case. But the supervisor rejected him immediately and demanded an update on what he had uncovered. Jin, not thinking twice, spilled everything, including the details about the journalist's case. That's when Wanja warned him. He needed to either back off from Ina or investigate her thoroughly. There were too many unknowns in her life that he was clueless about. Jin then went to meet the officer who had handled the journalist's case. That officer admitted he'd always suspected something was off. I mean, who kills themselves in that way? And the whole thing with the puzzle piece had felt wrong, especially considering the journalist's recent divorce and his responsibility for his young son. He was on antidepressants and sleeping pills, which made suicide plausible, and that's why the case had been closed so quickly. Jin hit the officer with a verbal blow, pointing out that he had closed the case in such a suspicious manner, and just 2 months later, that same officer had been promoted to department head. Jin felt incredibly naive. Here he was, confidently waving his arms in discussion like he had all the answers, only to find out the person he thought knew the least actually knew everything. Jin went to confront him again and asked why he had done all this. He walked in, recalling past memories. Remember when you used to visit the orphanage every month to help the kids? Or when you attended victims' funerals to apologize for not being able to save them? But when he brought up the missing handkerchief from the scene, the officer brushed it off and kept playing dumb. Eventually, the officer admitted he didn't mention the journalist's case because there was a detail Jin didn't know. Ina was present at the crime scene that day. She had a group tutoring session in the apartment just above the journalist's. She mysteriously disappeared during the time of the murder. When questioned, she claimed she had stepped out to get some fresh air. The officer concluded, "So instead of interrogating me, maybe you should go ask her about that." Meanwhile, Ina visited the building where the crime had taken place, trying to trigger her memory. Standing there, it all started coming back. She remembered seeing the journalist. He looked agitated, yelling into his phone as he walked up to his apartment. It seemed like someone was threatening him for money. Ina herself had left the tutoring session out of boredom and went up to the rooftop to take a break. That's when she saw a person dressed entirely in black entering the building, but from where she stood, she couldn't make out any features. After her memory flashback, she went to see Jin, hoping to talk, but as usual, it turned into an argument. She felt like he didn't trust her and said, "I was just embarrassed to tell you. I knew a detail like that would only make you suspect me more, so now that you're unsure about me, go decide who you actually trust, then talk to me." That night, she reviewed Danso's call records and noticed a name, Chillin, which sounded familiar. When she asked her housemate about him, she was told that Chillin had been a close friend of her uncle's, constantly sending him overly expensive gifts, but no one had ever seen his face. Ina decided to travel to Jeju Island to meet him. He welcomed her warmly on his boat the moment she mentioned her uncle's name. It turned out they had a lot of mutual interests, particularly shady ones. Later that day, Jin was feeling uneasy and decided to call Ina to apologize for the misunderstanding, but he was shocked when the police answered. She had been arrested and was now in custody, accused of killing Chillin. Jin rushed to Jeju to get the full story, but when he saw Ina, she was cold, distant, and refused to give him any straight answers. The officer in charge explained that someone had witnessed her strangling Chillin with a rope, and her fingerprints were found all over the boat. The evidence was overwhelming. Even the police chief came to visit her. He saw Ina like a daughter and happened to be friends with Wanja. He questioned her endlessly, trying to get the truth, but she remained silent. Eventually, she snapped, "Why are you surprised? You've all been suspecting me this whole time. Now that I've been caught, you can finally relax." At the same time, Ina's therapist was also in Jeju for a conference led by her friend, Dr. Sadok. He was giving a presentation about a child who had killed his own father due to untreated depression. He said, "I saw the darkness in the boy's eyes. That's how I knew he did it." Suddenly, the therapist received a call from Jin. He begged her to visit Ina in jail, hoping she could get her to open up. When Ina saw her, she was shocked by the coincidence. What are the odds? We're both on this island at the same time, and during a murder investigation? What surprised Ina even more was how confident the therapist seemed in her innocence. Still, Ina kept playing it cool, refusing to break her guard. Before the therapist left, Ina gave her the new puzzle piece to deliver to Jin. Then, with a soft heart, she also gave him the contact number of the taxi driver she rode with after her meeting with Chillin, hoping it could help prove her innocence. She finally revealed the full story. After she left Chillin, she took a cab back to the hotel. While riding, a man on a motorcycle tapped on the window and handed her a puzzle piece, then sped off. That's when she realized the real killer was watching their every move. He even knew which hotel she had booked. She explained that she had framed herself on purpose to see how people would react. She wasn't ready to go to prison because the killer was using her as part of a larger plan. Now everyone who had visited her in jail was under suspicion. She didn't trust anyone. The first person she decided to investigate was her therapist. "Why did you choose to take my case?" she asked. The therapist was thrown off but replied calmly, "You came to me. You said you weren't comfortable with Dr. Sang and requested a transfer. I'm only here for the conference. It's just a coincidence." Ina thanked her but wasn't convinced. She went straight to Dr. Sang's office to question him, but it was empty. At that same moment, Jin returned to the old precinct he used to work at, determined to find out what had really been going on before he joined the current investigation. At that time, one of the regulars finally realized that Wanja was far too secretive. He never talked about himself, not even once. One day, while they were all hanging out late, he suddenly left, saying his brother had a situation and he had to go. Later, they discovered that this happened to be the same night Ina's uncle died. Of course, this triggered Jin's suspicions. Wanja grew up in an orphanage and didn't have any siblings at all. On top of that, the get-together they were at took place in the same neighborhood where Ina's uncle lived. The distance between them? Barely 10 minutes. The number of strange coincidences was just piling up. Soon after, the police chief began to understand what Ina was saying. All the incidents were connected, so he assigned a full investigation team to the case, putting Amjad in charge. Naturally, Ina was part of the team. She was at the very center of it all. At the end of the day, Ina met with Jin to tell him everything that had happened. She also learned something new. All the victims from the connected incidents were somehow linked to a single building, one that Jin had also once been a part of. He believed that meant he could become a target too. When she appeared confused, he asked her if her parents had ever told her anything about their past. It seemed like there was a lot she didn't know about her own life. He explained that her parents and his were close friends before they died. In fact, he had a son the same age as her, meaning Ina must have known him at some point. She was overwhelmed. This was all news to her. The next day, as Ina returned from work, she found Wanja waiting outside her home. She snapped, "What do you want? You here to finish me off or something? You know there are security cameras everywhere." But he ignored the sarcasm and went straight to the point. "You were on the rooftop watching the journalist. Did you notice anything strange that day?" She reminded him that the incident happened 10 years ago. Her memory wasn't perfect, but she promised to let him know if she remembered anything new. Wanja simply nodded and left. Meanwhile, Jin grew more convinced than ever that Wanja had taken the missing handkerchief from the crime scene. He brought in the assistant who had first mentioned it, and together they conducted a hypnosis session to help retrieve the memory. Under hypnosis, the assistant relived the moment. It was blurry at first, but finally, he recognized the person who took the handkerchief, Wanja. Jin rushed to arrest him, but Wanja showed up at the station himself. In front of everyone, he confessed, "I took the handkerchief. I'm the one who killed them all. These are my hands. Arrest me." The confession shocked the entire team. Jin, feeling deeply betrayed, launched into the interrogation but lost his temper. "How did you manage to do all of this without making me suspect you even once?" he shouted. "So all of this was just an act?" Wanja replied calmly, "Didn't I tell you not to trust anyone around you until you know the full truth?" He refused to give any further details unless the press was present, insisting that many things needed to be revealed publicly. Later, when they searched his apartment, they found he had basically turned it into a shelter for young men who had aged out of the orphan system and had nowhere else to go. Since orphanages release kids at 18, Wanja had taken them in himself. This struck a chord with Ina, and she personally went to inspect the place. Her perspective was always different after all. She didn't find any leads, but she took Wanja's fish tank home to Jin, asking him to feed the fish, a small gesture to ease his pain. She comforted him, assuring him he hadn't done anything wrong. But she was starting to believe that Wanja knew who the real killer was and was protecting them. They visited the orphanage where Wanja was raised and sat with his closest childhood friend to understand his personality better. The friend described him as a kind soul, someone who couldn't even hurt a fly. He mentioned that Wanja's personality shifted after joining the police academy. He didn't join to serve justice. He joined to find a specific person. But the friend stopped there, refusing to reveal more. "That's personal," he said. "Those are his secrets, not mine to tell." At that point, Jin was convinced Wanja wasn't behind the murders. He had him released and said, "Next time, please don't waste our time. We have zero evidence linking you to these crimes." Afterward, Ina went to confront Dr. Sang, asking, "What's the deal with the story about the boy who killed his father? Don't you think you talk about it a bit too much? What if that boy was you?" "Calmly, Doctor," Sang replied. "I'm just emotionally invested in that story. Maybe I talk too much, sure, but that's all." Then, brushing it off, he added, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got late appointments." The next day, Jin got a call from his assistant. He was tracking Wanja and reported that he seemed to be heading somewhere, possibly to a new crime scene. At the same time, we see the mayor and his associate hunting birds at a ranch. They're discussing how the place would soon be turned into a public road, a project that would benefit everyone. Suddenly, the location tracker on Wanja's phone showed he was heading toward the same ranch. Realizing he was being followed, Wanja went into hiding. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared behind the assistant and knocked him unconscious. He took his gun and continued on his way toward the mayor and his friend. From a distance, Wanja observed them and noticed another person aiming a weapon at them from the opposite side. In a moment of bravery, Wanja leapt out to try and warn or protect them, but he was shot, the bullet hitting his shoulder. By the time Jin arrived, he found Wanja collapsed on the ground, barely conscious. He did everything he could to revive him. Wanja gasped, "I tried to stop it, but I was too late. Tell them the person doing all this isn't evil, he's doing it for me, and everyone who died, they deserved it." And with that, he lost consciousness. An ambulance finally arrived and managed to save the mayor just in time. They rushed him to the hospital and he was placed under intensive care. Suddenly, news outlets started reporting on the case. It was now being treated as a series of connected crimes. Not only that, but they even published an image of one of the puzzle pieces. It was obvious who leaked it: Ina. She was sure the killer was orchestrating everything to convey a message the world needed to hear. And indeed, just 1 hour later, the killer sent a new puzzle piece to the media, pushing the case into the national spotlight so the truth would be exposed. At that very moment, the mayor took his last breath and passed away. When they questioned the mail carrier about where the puzzle piece had come from, she told them it was mailed in with no return information. With no further leads, the team held an emergency meeting to connect the dots. Jin pointed out that every time there was an incident, Wang had ended up at the Unity building. Somehow, Ina was always involved, whether directly or indirectly, whenever something went wrong. Later, Ina visited the crime scene again to mentally reconstruct what had happened. One question kept nagging at her: why had the killer finished off the mayor so abruptly at the scene? She reasoned that the killer had wanted to get to Wang before he died too, which explained the rush. When they reviewed the mayor's death records, they found someone had spiked his IV fluids with a slow-acting substance, meaning the killer either worked in the hospital or had access to it. Ina then went to the clinic to confront Dr. Sang to ask where he had been during the incident, but the receptionist told her the clinic had just reopened after being closed for 2 days. While waiting in Sang's office, Ina noticed a painting on the wall. The signature looked eerily similar to the one on the puzzle art. She began to suspect something. Taking a key from his desk, she decided to make a surprise visit. Meanwhile, Jin was in his office, struggling to connect any new clues. He suddenly received a call from a public payphone. A strange voice asked, "Why are you so sure the person who drew the puzzle is the same person committing the crimes?" Then the line went dead. They traced the call location and discovered a parked car with a security camera. Reviewing the footage, they identified the caller. It was Dr. Sang. At the same time, Ina had arrived at the doctor's home. She searched his place and confirmed that he did indeed draw the puzzle pieces, but it was also clear he had no connection to the murders. The vibe of his home made that obvious. Just then, Jin called Ina to tell her Sang had used a payphone. But Ina reassured him that Sang was innocent. He'd probably created the artwork without knowing how it would be used. When Ina went down to the floor below, supposedly where her therapist lived, she immediately realized who the killer was. The apartment was a chaotic mix of toys and clashing lights, the textbook home of a psychopathic criminal. On the bed lay the latest puzzle piece. She was stunned. Her therapist, the woman she had trusted the most, had been behind it all. At that moment, Jin was interrogating Sang. He insisted, "She couldn't have done this. She's gentler than a lamb. I know her." Just then, Ina walked in and placed the puzzle piece on the table, asking him what it meant. Sang swore he didn't know, he only drew it because it came to him. Then the team received word. A high-profile politician was missing. They immediately assumed this would be the next crime scene. During renewed questioning, Sang admitted that the therapist was a friend from college, and they lived and worked in the same building. She was the one who had chosen that location. He remembered that she was always a loner, didn't have many friends, and barely opened up. The only reason she rejected Ina as a patient was because Ina had been her classmate in high school. Detective Rawan added that the therapist had always been strange, even back in school. The only memory she had of her was from a time the whole school went on a trip to an amusement park, except for them. When she asked her why she hadn't gone, the therapist had replied, "Because I hate those places. My mother abandoned me in an amusement park when I was 7. If I ever see her again, I'll end her." Ina went to that amusement park to confirm her suspicions. Sure enough, she found a missing person poster with the therapist's photo as a child. Meanwhile, Jin visited a different orphanage to speak with Wang's old friend to learn who Wang had been searching for. The friend, now grieving, explained that Wang had once worked in a restaurant run by a woman whose daughter had gone missing. He had tried to help her investigate, and that restaurant once stood where the Unity building is now located. Finally, Jin and Ina pieced everything together. They flashed back 20 years to when that area was just a market. Authorities had started clearing it to build the Unity building. The therapist's mother had refused to sell, hoping her daughter might return someday. She also took Wang in, since he had just left the orphanage and had nowhere to go. At the time, Wang and the therapist were both struggling, trying to survive. But the city, under Danso's orders, sent men in the middle of the night to burn the market and force residents to evacuate. Some escaped, others perished, including the therapist's mother. Ina's uncle, the officer assigned to the case, was bribed into covering it up. In return, he got an apartment in the Unity building. The press also got paid off to report that the fire was started by angry residents seeking revenge. The entire crime was buried instantly. Later that night, when Ina returned home, she felt someone behind her. Looking in the mirror, she saw the therapist standing there. "So, will you keep turning your back on me like you did that night?" she said. "Congratulations, you're healed. You don't need a therapist anymore." Ina was frozen with shock, realizing how badly she had misjudged her. The therapist told her she'd actually enjoyed those weekly therapy sessions, pretending to help her while plotting her revenge. Still, the therapist admitted she had always felt guilt about it. "If you want to know who the next victim is," she said, "come with me and see for yourself." Ina had only one goal now, to stop the next murder before it happened. So she got in the car with her. When Jin tried to call, the therapist snatched Ina's phone and threw it out the window. Then she said, "You know, ever since I lost my parents, I kept sleeping and waking, wondering why no one ever had the curiosity to look for me. After you didn't show up and I saw you had the puzzle and how curious you were to know the full story, I decided to continue telling it." Ina asked her, "Why didn't you kill me too?" She replied, "Why would I do that? You had nothing to do with any of this. Even Wang, I never wanted him to get hurt. He brought that on himself." She explained that Wang had figured out she was the killer when he found the handkerchief. It had belonged to her mother. He went to her clinic specifically to confront her and stop what she was doing. He offered to help her return to a normal life and promised to close the case quietly if she just stopped. But to her, that was like starting something you couldn't finish. "Why would I back out now, after coming all this way?" Ina asked. "So if Wang had never found out your identity or said anything about your mother, none of this would have happened?" She replied sarcastically, "Wow, you're all thinking the same way. Do you know how many times I've been asked that exact question?" Then she told her that nothing would have changed regardless, that it was their fate. She took Ina to the Unity building and told her the politician they were looking for was in Myung's apartment. Ina took the key and ran to try to save him. At the same time, Jin realized where she had gone and rushed over with the police. He was sure that's where everything would end. When Ina entered the apartment, she found it completely empty, except for the politician's jacket and a new puzzle piece lying next to it. Just then, Jin entered the building and saw a man fall from the rooftop. He realized it was the missing politician and ran upstairs, terrified for Ina. He was furious when he found her. "How could you trust her like that? Just go with her like it's nothing?" Ina stood frozen, devastated that she'd trusted the therapist one last time, only to be tricked again. They were all confused. The final puzzle piece was completely blank, just a solid black square. They returned home, preparing to start the investigation over from scratch, trying to identify the last piece of the chain. Sadly, the only conclusion they could draw was that the final crime would take place at the amusement park, where the therapist's trauma began. Then Jin received a call from his assistant. They'd found the therapist. She had gone to visit her mother's grave. When they checked the security footage, they saw her standing silently at the door for more than 30 minutes before walking away. Ina, suspecting her next move, headed straight to the amusement park. Sure enough, she found her sitting on the carousel. "What? Am I supposed to just wait for you here forever?" she said. She explained this was where her mother had abandoned her, ever since she'd come here every year hoping for some miracle that they'd meet again, until she finally gave up. "My mother," she said, "held on to her little restaurant all those years thinking I might come back. But my memory betrayed me. I couldn't remember a thing." Ina was overwhelmed, finally realizing how deeply her uncle, father, and mother had all been involved in the tragedy. She told her, "You got what you wanted. Maybe now you can give yourself a second chance at life." But the therapist didn't believe in happy endings. "I can't take it anymore. I've already killed 8 people. That emotional moment was shattered when Jin arrived, gun in hand. "You're under arrest," he said calmly. "Please come quietly." She looked at him and said, "I've never understood why people cling to life so tightly. It doesn't seem worth it." Then, without a word, she flicked a lighter. The air was heavy with the smell of fuel. She let the flame go and sat back down, her expression unreadable. Later, when they questioned Ina, who was the last person with her, she refused to give any details. "I forgot what happened," she said. Jin respected her decision and did the same. Back at home, Ina locked herself in her room, trying to process everything she had been through. Jin visited her every day, leaving a cup of coffee with his assistant, hoping she might come out to talk. Eventually, Ina gathered the courage to resign from her job. She simply couldn't continue anymore. Later, she visited the amusement park again and found Jin waiting for her at the entrance. "Finally," he said, "you escaped your cave." He tried to spark her curiosity with talk of a new case, but it was clear her passion for it had vanished. So he took her home to have dinner together. The next day, Ina appeared on a live TV show explaining the therapist's full backstory. Everything was finally out in the open. Sometime later, Jin was assigned to a new case. A woman had been murdered in broad daylight right in the middle of the street. The killer had covered the wound with a strange accessory, dressing her like a mannequin, and left her out as a public display for all to see. Jin stood at the scene, overwhelmed. Then suddenly, Ina appeared behind him. "The killer's definitely from around here," she said. "He left her here on purpose, like a piece of street art." Jin couldn't hide his joy. She was finally back. "And how did you figure that out?" he asked. Ina pulled a new puzzle piece from her bag. They both stood silently, stunned. And that's how our series ends. Subscribe for more dramas like this one, tap the bell icon to get the updates, and don't forget to like the video. Thanks for watching.